Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Plant Strong podcast. My name is Carrie Smith. I'm the content editor for the Plant Strong podcast, and today it is my privilege to fill in for our wonderful host, Lisa Bennett. We are going to bring you an encore presentation today of one of our most loved and listened to episodes. It's episode number 88, Soul Care with Mindy Caliguire, and it is a good one. This episode will remind us just how important it is to take care of our souls, and maybe especially as we head into this busy holiday season. So enjoy this encore presentation of episode 88 with our friend, Mindy Caliguire.
Well, good morning, Mindy. How are you? Welcome to the Plant Strong podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you, Lisa. It's great. It's a great morning.
Yes, it is. We're so excited. We've been looking forward to this as we have talked about a lot through our podcast, over the past few weeks, and we've been putting on our social. Our theme for Bloom for 2022 is Press Refresh. And
Love
that
it.
doesn't it just make you feel rejuvenated and joyful
Yes.
just even hearing
Yes.
it? I love it
Yes,
so much.
yes. Well, we all know when you hit refresh on your screen, right? Like it takes whatever web page was loaded and it's just like, oh, it's fresh. Like whatever's current, whatever's real, whatever got changed on the back end. Now that's what I see.
So good. It cleans it up. It takes
Yep.
away all the clutter.
Yep.
But that happens often. I know I press refresh on my computer real often because I'm that 47 tabs open kind of girl. So
Right.
I have to regularly remind myself, hey, let's be a little more focused and simplify. So that's what we are here to do today.
Love
We
it.
are here because as you and I have been talking, prepping for today, we've shared that over the past 2 years, obviously, these type of conversations have raced to the foreground, like across the board in every, across the spectrum, in every arena of life, it seems.
Yep.
Very important voices and great thinkers such as Brene Brown, Adam Grant, they are speaking to this from very prominent stages, really to a worldwide, a global audience. And it is just an exciting time to be in a posture of learning. And then to take it down even a little closer to home with Christian leaders and voices of what the church is going to look like in kind of this next iteration. We've got voices like Carrie Newhoff and Bob Goff, and they're literally writing books about this very thing. It's a celebration, but on the flip side, sometimes we kind of feel like we're drowning in it. And ironically, what I've heard from some of our community is we're drowning in it, and yet we're still either personally or we know someone who is teetering on the edge of burnout. Yep. And who is struggling, and who it's like with all the words, we still maybe are struggling to know, but what do I do about it? What do I do about it? Yeah. Even very recently in this podcast, we had Jan Lamero, one of our, our OGs who we have learned from through the years. And she has spoken to us so beautifully. And we kind of dipped our toe in the big conversation. Mm-hmm. And then today I'm excited because we want to take advantage of your experience and your wisdom to kind of drill down even more specifically. I'm gonna just toss it to you in a minute, but to give you a little context of what our biggest feedback for this conversation today was. And it makes my heart swell. I'm so proud of our women. Here was their struggle. I know soul care is important, but I really wrestle with teetering between soul care and what feels like selfish care. And that just, number one, it's a heaviness. I want freedom for our listeners, but I also, it just makes me love them so much more. We are a people that want to serve. We want to do the things that draw people to Jesus. And it's from this place of desiring to give all that we have for the kingdom. And that's to be honored, that desire.
Yeah.
And so now we really want to lean into you and hear what you have to say about that tension and that toggling back and forth between that.
No, it is a tricky tension. Jesus's challenges are pretty straightforward, and many of us have taken them very much to heart. It's like, what does it mean to lay down my life daily and follow him? What does it mean to, some of the more dramatic, leave everything and follow him? And so how do we think about those? Because we all also at this point know so many people who've maybe used those verses as an excuse for true, like, soul toxic living.
Yes.
And now we're seeing the consequences of it. So we live in, like, so God, what did you mean? What exactly are you inviting me into? And how do I hold those things? So I think it's a vital question. And, a couple thoughts come to mind as we start out. And gosh, I keep having this one thought come to mind. You may have well already addressed this in the refresh theme, but pressing refresh made me think immediately of, God presses our refresh every single day. The thought that his mercies are new every morning. Many of us have a hard time. We carry like a whole list of things I failed yesterday, things I did wrong, things I did right, things other people did wrong or right. And we have a hard time just embracing the newness of a new day, letting God meet us in a new way, and literally pressing refresh. So anyway, I had to add that because I was really, really thinking about you. I was out, I had to do this crazy trail run this morning, not a real trail run, but to get out of the rain.
But kind
thing.
of.
So yeah. It was a little bit more than I normally would be. And I was so grateful to the Lord for how he spared this one little thing I was trying to protect, TMI. But anyway, his mercies are just new every morning. None of what we receive day after day from the hand of the Lord is because we've deserved it, we've earned it. It's just grace. It's just his goodness. And sometimes a day brings really happy things, and some days a day brings really hard things. And nonetheless, his grace, his presence is with us to refresh our souls. So anyway, back to the more practical things.
Well, I'm going to stop you for a minute because you said that it was pressing in on you. And here I am. I'm crying already. We are not 5 minutes into our episode. Okay. That exact verse is one of the verses that we selected. This podcast is going out. You guys out there are listening to it, and you're either listening to it right before or right after our balloon breakfast that we're having in March. And this is one of the verses that we chose to frame, to give as a gift. And I wrapped it up this morning and sent it to my mother-in-law. Who, guys listening, I told Mindy this story prior to us starting to record. So I am already teetering on the edge of being a mess because God is so good. He is so tender. And that is so very real. It's just so very real. And there is something that mattered that you shared that. And I think there's listeners out there that are resoundingly saying, I needed to hear that Jesus daily refreshes me. And I think that is going to be a picture and an image that we carry through. So thank you for going in that direction. That's super.
For sure. I'm glad. And that's really, you had already told me about wrapping those gifts, but I didn't know what they were. So that's just really precious. Yeah. He's just so good. God is just so good. Yes. Worthy of our sacrificial service at times, absolutely worthy of that. But I one of my mentors, she used to have a talk that she gave about, and I think the title of the talk was, and she was a church planner's wife, that or I guess a church planner technically. She said, her talk was, I died to myself and myself almost died. And I think there are areas, yes, that we die to ourselves. We die to our ego. We die to our need to be right. We might die to any number of things, that the more we die to those things, as Jesus said, the more we have life. But there are parts of us that are not the part that's supposed to die. And in particular, I think this inner life that we have with God is something that we must protect and guard, and isn't part of the thing that's supposed to go away. But sadly, that can sometimes be one of the first things that goes when we're in ministry.
That has honestly, I have never heard of it put quite that way. And that, I want us to pause on that for a second. That, wow, like we do it often we do it this way, this big sweeping. If he said die to self, that means literally nothing. We are disembodied. Like, I have been doing so much reading and listening and learning from therapists who are talking about our, especially Western Christian idea of that the body is separate. And it's like, we have destroyed this temple that God gave us to be the vessel that he uses. We are just trashing it in the name of something that is chasing off the wrong trail to begin with. So that is, I really want our listeners to make note of that it could it be a completely different concept, that it is dying to ego, dying to the need to be right, dying like that. That makes sense, but it does not mean if you're hungry, except if you're fasting. You guys know, I'm not trying to start a fight here. I'm talking about day to day, skipping lunch every day because you're so busy and someone interrupted that you think that everything has to be dependent on what's coming in at you. So that's valuable. I just wanted to pause there and really, that's really good.
And it's a very understandable tension. And I think women in particular, there's a little bit of a gender scenario that comes into play here. You know, our traditionally biggest sort of contribution is our service to others, and that's sort of how the church has seen women. That's how family systems often see women, and of course that's a delight and a joy that we do serve into many scenarios. But we can't keep giving out of a vacuum, right? Like if you have nothing left and we all can say stories of, I had nothing left and then this thing came and the Lord gave me what I needed. And like on occasion, of course, that happens. But as a matter of course, as you said, we can be actually trashing the vessel that God intended to be our power pack, to bring into the world to serve. And the connections with the body are massive, that we could have a whole separate conversation about that and how the integration is what's so critical right now. But I want to pause, back to your opening questions a little bit about soul care versus self-care. And I talk a lot about both. I think they're very connected to one another. So if you say that your soul, as I believe is the case biblically, is the thing that integrates all the dimensions of your personhood, your soul care most broadly incorporates things that in our world right now we think of as self-care. Am I getting enough sleep? Is my body moving around? Am I getting good nutrition? Am I taking care of my brain and my immune system? And am I relationally connected to people? Like all the dimensions of the soul that Dallas Willard talked about in Renovation of the Heart, and other authors and brilliant philosophers, theologians have talked about. All of those dimensions of personhood are wrapped up into this idea, integrated into the biblical concept of soul. So soul care, broadly understood, would incorporate all those things in their right place. However, I do believe, given the sort of, and I've heard a ministry wife friend of mine, she's also a speaker and writer, she has recently realized that her I got to take care of myself, self-care thing, that it's possible to have the bubble bath, have an afternoon off, whatever feels restful for the body and can still be good, but was still not getting her soul to a place of deep openness before God in the spiritual dimension, right? And she has been on a journey, I would say, the last 6 months, and she, had been dealing with some anxiety, some panic attacks, that kind of stuff. And which many of us, that's the moment that we're in, as you were saying earlier. And it's like, okay, bubble baths, getting enough sleep. Yes, those are good. I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
And I think the area of deficit that was true in my life, in my season of church planting, and I think is true in many lives, is that I did not know how to let my soul, my whole person, rest in God's presence without an agenda, just to receive from him whatever he had for me. Not as marching orders to go do a thing, but just to receive love, just to receive his nurture and his presence and his care. And so, anyway, now I also want to give you, because this was the context, it was church planting when this was first introduced to me. I think it was through one of Henry Cloud's books, maybe one of his first Boundaries books, or maybe even one prior to that. But he was using the passage in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 7, I think says, each one should give. It's a context of giving, financial giving. Each one should give what they've decided in their heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Most of us know that pretty well.
Sure.
And the context, in truth, is financial giving, what the church was offering, and this was Paul's, challenge to them. And Henry did a couple things in that text that I've just loved. So one was, let's expand our thinking of things we give beyond money. Okay. We give our time, we give attention, we give our service. There are things that we give, because in church planting, we're like, I don't have any money. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, that's not a real conversation for me usually. Like, it's like, oh man, like
money may come way later, right?
If we tithe to the church plant, then can we cut our check, right? It was just so like hard, always hard financially. And I totally understand that. So anyway, it was helpful for me to broaden the aperture of what we were looking at, of resources that I have. Like every day, you and I have a refresh on what are the resources? What is my energy? What can I pay attention to? Who can I give love to today? Who do I, those kinds of things. So if we widen that, and if we say that the scriptural admonition, is that the right word? Imperative to us is we should give what we have decided in our heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Well, I think many of us have thought, well, then I need to slap a smile on my face and keep giving. And Henry was like, what does it mean to give not reluctantly or under compulsion? And I felt challenged in this season of my, I was leading small groups, holding kids together very early on my recovery. Some of you guys know, I had this really crazy crash midway through the church planting years. And I was like, I need to find a different way of life because this is not working, but I didn't know any other way. So this teaching came to me right at that time. And I mean, Lisa, I remember thinking, if I only did what I had in my heart to give with these caveats, not reluctantly or under compulsion. And I thought at that time, almost everything I was doing for our church was reluctant and under compulsion.
Yes.
Not for my kids, not for our family or home, but I was so burned out. And I had lost the ability to know, is this something God's inviting me into? Or is this something I just feel pressured by, my hyper sense of responsibility? Or, somebody in the church is pressuring me, or my husband, is pressuring me. Like, there were
the guy I'm sleeping with is going to be ticked off with me. Yes.
Right. No, I mean, let's be real, guys.
It's so real.
That's so real. And it's like, hey man, there's nobody else that can do this. And it's like, how many times can you keep saying yes to that? And so not reluctantly or under compulsion. And I remember realizing one day, if I didn't do any of the things that I am reluctantly doing right now or feeling compelled to do, I don't know if I would do anything.
Gracious, that's so real.
And I thought, that's not okay. I went to a place of judgment. Like, what does that say about me? What is it? Judgy.
Oh yeah.
But I thought, I need to hold that boundary. I need to try, because everything I've tried before got me where I was. So like, I need to try a new thing.
Yeah.
So I thought, all right, what if I only did what I had in my heart to give? And I need to put a new filter there. What is in my heart to give? Like, I wasn't used to paying attention to that. I was used to paying attention to what is needed out there. What do I have in my heart to give, where there's no, I'm doing it because somebody made me, or I feel compelled, or I'm, whatever. And then I realized I just need to trust that in God's way, and that's what part of Henry Cloud's point was. It's like, when we overdo, we're stepping into the space that God intends to be filled by somebody, or the consequences of the thing to play themselves out. But when we keep stepping in beyond what we should, that's not the path to goodness. Anyway, so I sat in that verse for, I want to say 3 or 4 years. Like, that became, I need to discover what is in my heart to give. Who am I being invited to serve? What would that look like? How can I give out of these unforced rhythms of grace? How can I receive from the Lord what things? Then it's like, well, you're the pastor's wife. You can't just decide to only give what's in your heart to give. And right. I mean, it's like we make up all these rules. And what if God was really poised to do something new in my heart? But I was never open to that because I was so driven to doing other things. Yeah. And I mean, it was like 3 years later that I happened to read beyond that one verse. I want to go read it for you. Because I stayed in that. Each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And ladies, if you're listening to this right now and you just need to hunker there like I did for a while, it puts your faith to the test. Yeah. Is God going to hold all the things?
Yes. Yeah.
And will you learn a new way of not doing things reluctantly or under compulsion? It's a lot of fun getting on the other side. I'll promise you that. Now, here's what verse 8 says. And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work.
Good gracious.
And I honestly, I hadn't read past that one verse in years. And when I read the next verse, I thought, that's what I've experienced. I held that boundary, and God has opened far more than I ever would have imagined as opportunities to actually serve out of the fullness of my heart, not reluctantly, not under compulsion. And we can get back to that point where we are a cheerful giver because the bank account has cash in it, the emotional bank account, the gifting bank account, the capacity account, like they're full.
There really is enough, isn't there?
There is, but you can't just pretend like there is. Like, nobody benefits if you write a blank check. And yet that's what we do with our service. That's what we do with our attention. We write blank checks, or not blank checks that are going to bounce.
That's right. Right.
We
are overdraft. Checks. We need that.
Yeah.
That dang overdraft protection.
Yeah. Like, if I came to Stadia right now and said, I would like to write Stadia a $3 million check, and everyone would applaud. They'd be like, oh, Mindy, you're so generous. You're so gracious. You're so great. Whatever. I promise you that check is not going to clear.
Right. Right. That's going to be trouble for everybody because people are going to count on
You're
it.
going to make decisions.
And then it's not going to come through. And so you're going to feel horrible. And you've disappointed the people that you're trying to serve, which is there a better picture of what we end up doing with the best intentions.
Correct. So let's stop writing checks that are going to bounce.
Yeah.
And then get better at knowing the way you have to pay attention to your bank account before you make a transaction. It's like, how do you start knowing what is in your heart to give?
Okay.
And
I'm going to stop you there because I'm going to get you to unpack that next point. So one of my gifts that I bring to the table is I read a room really well. And it's a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing is I can get very distracted when one person is crossing their arms and going, I'm not buying any of it. I can't. So I can do that. I have a magic power. I can do that over the interwebs as well. And I'm going to push back on you. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, go for it.
It's impressive. I'm going to tell you that there's going to be a beautiful individual sitting out there who launched in the past, I don't know, let's just pick a number, like 3 months. And they are hearing you say that, and they believe God's word is true. That's why they're doing this thing. Of course, they believe every word of scripture is true. And they're pushing back on us and going, I even get it, Lisa and Mindy, that in maybe 6 months, I can do that. But are you telling me that I'm not fully surrendered, or I'm not trusting enough to do the extra thing? So what I'm going to say, I'll let you speak into it as well, but what I'm going to bounce back is, I remember sitting, I can't remember where it was or what format it was, but Tim Keller, at one point, I heard him say, you can do for a season what would be a sin for the long haul. And that he was speaking in the context of things that we say yes to that are for a season. But here is the caveat that I think a lot of us we do that part to give ourselves a rubber stamp of it's okay. And we do not take it seriously, the part where he says season, or we interpret season as 6 years. A season's never 6 years, guys. I can say that pretty much confidently. There's never going to be necessarily a season, especially in this very narrow context that we're speaking. So that's one thing that I'm going to offer back to you, because we do see you sitting out there who are like really snowed under right now. I also want to speak to the other person that may be crossing their arms and going, y'all are just tired old people, because I got energy to spare, and I don't know why everybody's so negative.
What's the big stink about all this?
Literally, I got a text from I'm going to leave their name off because I adore them and I don't want to dull any of their shine. They are in a wind beneath my wings season of vibrancy. And so I laughed to myself when they gave me their response, because it had nothing to do with real, like, being drained. It was something of that, but it was like, you could tell the timeline. And that is not, I'm also not throwing shade. I'm not saying, here's the thing. I think we could have more people responding to my texts that I ask certain members of our community to give me feedback. I think we might have more of that going forward if we would get this thing straight. So to those of you who are just starting out and you are energized and you are inspired and you're like, I'm tired of hearing people complain about how hard church planning is. Don't let us dull your shine. It is worth being excited about. It is inspiring, and you can help lead the pack. But I will say, and I would assume that all of you, even if you are in that energized season, you at least have friends that you love who are committed, who have gone down the more dark path. And so what we want to say is, it's not all treacherous, but it certainly can be. And these are the conversations we think are valuable. So even if you feel like today you are energized and ready to roll, I still ask you to stick with us, because I think we're going to get some real practical things that you might look back in 5 years and go, ooh, I'm glad I did listen, because maybe it might not, my energy level might wane a little bit.
I think that's what, that I think, first of all, glad you brought up both those arm crossers virtually. And I do think for someone who is in a place of a true overflowing right now, I mean, Godspeed. That's awesome. There's no shade over that. And if that is their authentic experience,
that's right,
and I have no reason to believe it's not,
right,
I think that's fabulous. I would say I'm in a season right now where a lot of people look at my life and they're like, wait, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. Like I'm a high capacity person.
right.
And when
Exactly.
when I am grounded in God, when I am caring for my soul and my body, like all the dimensions, the human flourishing is real. We are designed for flourishing. We are designed to have capacities that are not only our own human strengths, but then infused with the power of the Spirit. Like this, that is a very good thing and a very good season. And it, getting to a point of burnout does not have to be like an essential part of the journey. Like I hope my work, your work, all people's work gets us to a point where this is no longer some sort of crazy rite of passage that I happened to hit early. I was I was not even 30 when all this crazy stuff happened to me. Yeah. So I wasn't a crazy old person then. I am.
I know. But, don't tune us out, y'all. We can still speak to it.
But that's so when it hit for me.
Yeah.
But as to the person who's like 3 months in, they're already feeling like they're swimming underwater and they don't know how to get up to the top to breathe. And I just would say that take note and don't just assume it has to stay this way.
I love that you said pay attention earlier. I think that too, that is so critical. Pay attention. You're paying attention to everybody around you, but often we just stop. We are no longer paying attention to what our body's telling us, what our mind is telling us, the stimulation. Speak on that.
Yeah. And it's not selfish to do that. If you think about how seriously scripture would cause us to think as stewards of resources, stewards of many things. Well, one of the things you're stewarding is yourself, your life. And, Jesus said, how would you benefit if you gained the whole world but forfeited your soul or your life? What would you give in exchange for it? Obviously, it's a rhetorical question. There's nothing you could give in exchange for that. It's your whole life. And, the Greek word in there, suke, is equally translated life and soul. The soul isn't some like Jesus bumper sticker that you prayed a certain prayer and now you have a ticket to eternity when you die. Like there are a lot of ways that we unknowingly have a reductionist understanding of what the human soul even is. And so if you take that view, then, well, of course, you've prayed a prayer, you're going to heaven, your deal is done. Like we say these kinds of things. And then we have no rhetoric or imagination for how the soul matters in Christ. Like once you are a Christian, why should you even care about the soul? Well, I think biblically, and what we see now at scale around the world in Christian circles and not, is we're seeing what happens when we lead this very disintegrated life. We've got to pull it all back together and see ourselves as stewarding this one and only life that is so precious. And yes, we lay down that life and receive our life from God. And how could you benefit if you gained the whole world or built a great prayer ministry or started a great church and forfeited your life? Like that makes no sense whatsoever. That's not a good long-term play. So anyway, I think paying attention is huge, coming to a point where you embrace a few rhythms. And I know we'll get to talking to a few more practical ways to bring this elevation of awareness and connection with God into the dailies of life. I mean, these things are available to us as as readily as the air you're breathing right now,
That's right.
as readily as the breath you take is the availability of the kingdom around us at all times and in all ways. And honestly, sometimes we go through ministry kind of like holding our breath, like, oh wait, I'll take time in a minute, but I don't have time to breathe right now, which is just absurd. The air is all around you. Why would you do that to yourself? We can easily imagine why you would not try to hold your breath for a week and do ministry, right? But spiritually speaking, we kind of do that. And anyway, those are just some of the things that I would say to the friend who's, in a very, very demanding season of ministry. Yeah. And the question then is, how can you decide, I don't want to stay this way.
Yes.
I don't want to stay in a place of toxic depletion. It's not good for me. It's not good for my family. It's not good for even my calling. Like, everything gets put at risk when we don't pay attention and don't course correct.
That's right.
But it doesn't mean you have to completely hit the eject button on your life. That's usually not available to us.
Right.
Or usually things got really bad if it required that.
Yeah.
But if you can bring that awareness and then some intentionality, like, oh, I have a choice here. I want to move and I want to learn. Jesus, in the paraphrase of Matthew 11, challenges us to learn those unforced rhythms of grace. Yeah. We don't know them automatically.
That's so good.
Drivenness. We know how to keep pushing. We know how to.
Your mentors may have even set some bad examples. Like, let's just call it what it is. God loving, Jesus chasing people whose heart was in the right place. We may have to relearn things and not be afraid to listen to the leading of Jesus and wise words of what's being revealed now of some of our mentors.
Yes.
Maybe are not finishing well because they're broken and it's consumed them. So it is such important work.
Yeah, I think my view, I talk to a lot of people in a lot of different organizations who are trying to lead in a way that is life-giving to their own soul and then allows their capacities of service to just expand. It's a much more expansive, exciting way to follow God, but it's not the norm in most Christian organizations. And so how do in part of like these change-oriented conversations, and Stadia is one of them that I've been loving the conversations having with Jamie Mahaffey and others. But it's like we're doing this, Soul Care is doing this listening tour around organizations that are trying to lead for soul health. And one of the first things we observed in as we were talking to people is I believe there is a deep refusal to go back to this prior way. And even if we don't know what the way forward actually is,
we shut the door to that one. We shut that one.
Yeah. And I think that is good that at scale, at a large level conversation, we're saying we can't go back there. And even if I admired those mentors for this or this or this, I actually have to go, I don't admire this. And if that's what it took to get that, then I'm going to ignore the whole thing and find a different path.
Right.
So anyway, that's some of the ways that that conversation has been going for me and for the woman that's underwater right now. Get to the surface and breathe.
That's right.
And you don't have to get out of the pool. You don't have to leave.
That's right.
But the availability of sustenance, the availability of help, the availability of peace and joy and love,
it's worth
might be nearer than your breath. Well, it might be nearer than Like, what if all you had to do was really float to the top?
That's true. It might not be about fighting for it. Just accept it. Yeah.
Right to the top, roll over on your back.
That's so good.
Breathe.
That's good.
I'm
all
a
right.
swimmer, so a lot of times I think about that.
I love it. I think that's right there, though. That's an example. Here's a 48-year-old girl who's using language of struggle. it doesn't have to be struggle. Why does it always default to struggle? Oh, Lisa. Lisa's working on it, I promise you. I am.
The struggle side of it, I identify with that. Like some of you may have read Greg McGowan's book on essentialism,
Yes.
and then his follow-on book called Effortless.
Yes.
Right. And he's like, we have this false belief that if something really matters, then it must be really hard. And we've got to push hard. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this going, I have done this in every area of my life. Like my
every possible area.
Thing. Oh, she's like, if how does she say it? If you're going to do it, why not overdo it? You know, it's something like that. You know, it's like, that's, I mean, it's like, why? And it's like, the more something matters, the more we amp up. And like, whoa, where's Jesus in that? He's not. His invitation is to a yoke that is easy and a burden that is light. And floating to the top of your life, rolling over on your back and breathing is not a picture of more effort. It's
grind. It's not rise and grind, folks. It's not rise and grind.
Oh, hilarious. I think the other thing, we do have such a hustle and grind culture in the church as well, that it just doesn't seem like that was Jesus's way. If we're looking at his life. And so
we're going to try to course correct. We want to wrap up this time. We've got plenty of time. So I'm not switching to shut it down. I'm saying I want us to use this time to, they're ready. We uncross those listeners' arms. They are with us. They are ready. They are ready to swim to the surface. So
good.
What are a couple, because we don't want to give them a list of 10 things. We want to get real practical with some things that they can start doing today to course correct in this whole crazy, our language, the narrative around it, all of it needs to be just completely reworked. So how can we start taking those steps?
So I've had a little rubric that I've been using a lot lately, and it seems to be helpful to people. So I'll toss it out there. It's not like 12 and a half steps, but it has been something that's helpful. And it's this idea that if you want to say, all right, what should I be holding in my head to make sure I'm caring for my soul? You need a page, a person, and a plan. And I'll unpack that. You need a page, a person, and a plan. We've talked about noticing. We've talked about sort of these mental habits that we have of being super judgmental or assuming something's harder and it's got to be grinding, or even assuming that God's posture toward us is one of judgment and anger or disappointment. And none of that is the heart of God, right? Mercies are new every morning. So when I say page, what I mean is, what are you doing to enlist like the power of reflection in the pages of a journal? Journaling, for women could be like your, diary when you were in 6th grade and talking about who you had a crush on, and men love to diss journaling on that basis. But it's also what people used who were explorers, who were exploring new territory. Scientists keep journals, explorers kept journals, whaling expeditions kept journals. And I like to kind of keep these like journals of unusual things, ancient old books, because what I think is the parallel in our lives is we're explorers. We're exploring the territory of the future or of our interior world that's kind of confusing sometimes. And if we took that posture of an explorer who's noticing, what is going on around me? What do I have in my heart to give? Like usually we don't even give enough space for a question like that to know what the answer is, because we have all kinds of judgments that we layer on what should be in our heart. And it's like, okay, well, how can I just have the posture of somebody who's exploring and then writing down, what do I notice? What are my questions for God? What are my thoughts? And there's even some really interesting neuroscience. I'm not like an expert to quote it like from original primary sources, but the main gist of it is even writing things down, you can type a lot faster than you can write. And it's actually beneficial to your brain It causes an integration between left and right hemispheres to have to write a thing down. And it slows you down.
Yeah.
It causes you to think and reflect and opens up space for then you to kind of listen. What is the Lord saying? God, do you have, I have found it's kind of almost unnerving sometimes when I hold a question before God in the pages of my journal. Sometimes I don't sense a response, but Lisa, sometimes I do. Yeah. And I think, is he really always wanting to be this conversational with me? And what other questions should I be asking? I do all the time. And again, not to layer judgment.
No,
but to
an
see
invitation.
It as an invitation, right?
Invitation.
So I believe one very critical piece and leaders, like one of the things that's essential for us as leaders is to develop the ability to reflect. Self-reflection is one of the most important things for us to really understand what is going on inside us. Why is that the case? Asking ourselves questions, and noticing, sometimes our answers to those questions about ourselves are just layered with shame and judgment. But like, that's going on in your head all the time. When you start writing it down, you look at it and you're like, wait, is that God's voice toward me? Where is that coming from? Anyway. Okay. So page is one big deal. And on the Soul Care website, there's like downloads for journaling. We have a 21-page jumpstart into journaling that we have as a resource. There's like all kinds of fun things that'll be available on the website if anybody wants to go to soulcare.com and hunt around for our journaling
link in our notes for sure. Yep.
Journaling resources. The second of the rubric is a person. We all need a safer place where we can process. You talked about Jan Lamaro. She's a spiritual director. Other people within and outside Stadia have that gifting, that calling, that way of being with people. But whether it's a spiritual director or a therapist or a coach or just a good spiritual friendship, having people who are for you, who are for your life with God, for your healthy family, for your ministry commitments, for your following God, but who can know the good, the bad, and the ugly, who are with you in the deeper conversations of your own soul's journey, your own soul's following of God. Those, again, back to the neuroscience stuff. I mean, I've really recently been diving into the world of Dr. Jim Wilder. He's a neurotheologian, if you can imagine. And he understands how the brain actually is formed or reformed in our character formation, which you could say is our spiritual formation, formed into the image of Jesus. And most of our methods of that stuff has been very like theoretical and nuts and bolts, and like what are the truths and how do I believe those truths? And it's very sort of left brain muscular achieving. And the truth that we're learning in the Christian space, but actually quite beyond, is that our identity is shaped and formed very much in relationship. Our ability to connect with God, with others. There are parts of our brains that are very much about our relational capacities. And if those are shut down when we are in a defended posture, which I've spent whole years in a highly defended place, right? I'm not proud of that, but it very much limits how much we're able to make good decisions. Anyway, this is a much bigger topic, but a person with whom you can be fully honest, vulnerable, etc. These are very important things. Now, a safe person to do that when you're in church planning and you're a pastor's wife, like that's, or the lead pastor yourself, those are really tricky things.
Sure.
And so it's vital to find either ministry peers or trusted friends or whatever, because sadly, most people in the church, and certainly people who are new to faith at times, or not yet believers, they unknowingly can put unbelievable expectations on you as someone in ministry, and they can't handle your inner journey. and they
Right.
shouldn't. They don't
Right.
need to know the ups and downs of your
Sure.
like life with God. You want to be appropriately transparent and vulnerable with people, but not in ways that are not appropriate for their stage of development. But you've got to make sure there's someone in your life who can know the full truth.
Yeah.
And so that's the person one. So page, self-reflection, a person, all about connection. And then a plan is really, it's sort of like, where do you fit all those other things? Self-care around health and well-being, all those dimensions of flourishing. And then that's where I think of some of the practices of prayer that have been really key in my life. And these are like the two last things I wanted to offer as part of like a plan. Like, what are the daily rhythms? What are the weekly rhythms? What are the, what is the page, the person, and the plan? And not to be, rigorous or onerous with it, and certainly not like to, leap tall buildings with a single bound. Like, it's just, what is the invitation from the Lord to you? But two huge practices for me relative to prayer that have turned into one in particular, an almost daily routine, and has been in place for many, many, many years, was introduced to me when I was in Boston when we were church planting, and it sounded like the most outrageous thing in the world. And I've talked about it in Stadia contexts before, but I just call it silent prayer. And this is like a really valuable form of soul level training, of letting your soul learn how to get quiet. The scriptural kind of imagery of this comes to us in Psalm 131 and verse 2. It says, "I've stilled and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child on its parent's lap is my soul within me." And that's one of the more rare sort of feminine pictures of God and his presence with us, or God's presence with us. And, since we're among women here, the difference between a weaned child and an unweaned child is known. And an unweaned child on its mother's lap, is usually wanting something, right? I need something. I want something. I'm demanding something. And sometimes when we go to God, we are like that. We're needing something. We want something. We're demanding. And I don't think God in any way begrudges us that.
Right.
But a more mature child, an older child, a weaned child who chooses to engage relationally on their parent's lap, how intimate is that? Usually when our kids get to be like 11, 12, 13, they might snuggle up close, but they're not really on their mom's lap. And if they're boys, they end up being bigger than us anyway.
Right.
Which is so sweet and precious. But how it is for the heart of a mom when an older child just wants to be near, just wants to sit on the couch with you, might want to be closer. And we know how heartwarming that is for us. I could think of times when one of my sons was probably at that age, and it's like, it'd probably been years since he sat on my lap. And we were at a restaurant, and I had been gone for a season, and unknowing, like no words were spoken, but I just noticed over time that he just kept scooching closer and closer and closer. And at one point, I was like, wow, he is about as close to sitting on my lap as a 12-year-old boy's gonna get. And I remember thinking, if I could freeze this moment, I would. If I could just freeze this moment, because as a parent, it was just so precious to me that he just wanted to be near. He wasn't asking for anything. He didn't need anything. He just wanted to be with me. And I don't even think consciously he knew what he wanted. He just was scooching, And I think there is something very tender and dear, healing to our soul when we develop a way of being in God's presence that's very open, unagendaed, uncluttered, again, God welcomes our requests. He invites those requests, but there's also a way of being that allows us to just rest in his good care. And this turns out that there are sort of techniques or methods to allow your soul in the mindfulness space. Actually, I think scripture absolutely reinforces this, but some of the language for this starts to become things that maybe Adam Grant and other of those people are, because everybody's landing on the fact that we have very chaotic interior worlds.
Yeah.
And Jesus all along, God has invited us into a way of being present to him, to be still and know that I am God, right? Like that was from a couple thousand years ago. That's not based on neuroscience in the last decade. That was God. No, that's God's invitation to us.
Yeah.
To set our minds intentionally in certain, what does it mean to fix our eyes on the unseen, not on the seen?
Well, and what a shift of a way of thinking. We've referenced multiple times in this conversation of how we struggle often with how we view that God is viewing us. Like we think he's always waiting to say you're not doing enough. And yet I am like tears again are streaming down my face because I know intimately what I'm the parent that has the child that snuggles up. Rarely. I mean, we don't have snugglers. So when it happens and I'm imagining, oh my goodness, that's what God thinks of me. That's really what God thinks of me. And if I can freeze that in my brain, it changes everything about how I view God.
Yes. It's an even more intimate, if I could share this as well. I don't think I've ever told anyone this. So there's an even more intimate version of this that I have sensed at times from the Lord. Where I've come into this place of silence and my mind is so full. I'm thinking about this, I'm arguing about that, I'm worrying about this. I'm like, our minds, we just go and go and go and go. And, or at least mine does.
Oh yeah.
And learning to just rest in God's presence and not have a thought. You're not singing a song, you're not quoting scripture, you're just still. There are times almost like, again, I feel really embarrassed to say this, but almost like I can imagine it in like a movie. It's like nobody's ever done this to me.
Right.
But like a lover who would just put their finger on your lips, like, like I just want to be with you. Yeah. And I just feel like that's sometimes what God is saying, not shaming, not angry, almost like I've got this, just be still. Wow. So, so silence, creating space in your life for silence. Women, I have to say, this has been one of the most transformational practices in my own journey. And there are times when life gets crazy and you're not having 45 minutes of time in God's word on that particular day, and you didn't have time for journaling. I really do try to make time for silence every single day. Sometimes it's 20 minutes or more, usually not more, but I try to, that's my goal. But if I don't have that available to me, but I can take 5 minutes to rest in God's presence before I'm launching into whatever's next. Sometimes in the middle of the night when I wake up and it's enough of a worry for me or stress that I'm like, I got to get up. It's 2 a.m, 3 a.m, but I go downstairs and I make some tea and I will sit in silence. In silent prayer. And I can't commend it to y'all enough, as a thing to incorporate in your life. And maybe people are already doing this on a regular basis, and I hope that's the case. But if this feels foreign to you, as it was for me, it takes a learning. It's like, this is hard. Like I don't know how to just sit and be still. Right. But over time, your soul, like a muscle, learns a new way. Right. And you're going to have these distracting thoughts, and then it's like one author says, well, when your thoughts run away, we'll go after them and bring them back.
Right. There is an easy answer to this. It's not impossible.
So funny.
Yes.
He's a devoted Christian man. And he's like, while you're with God and your thoughts run away, well, go after them and bring them back. Right. I was like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. That's exactly what you're doing. You're saying,
so obvious. Yes.
This time with God, I usually pick a word or phrase. It's like about joy or hope or whatever I'm feeling a deep need for. And then when I start making my like list of things I need to get at the grocery store that day, or trying to figure out my to-do list and how's that all going to work. The minute I become aware that my mind has gone, it's like, oh, no, this time is about joy. And I use that word or phrase to bring me back to stillness.
So good.
Huge help in my life.
So good.
Another form of prayer that was introduced to me, again, some people do this sort of without even knowing, and then others of us really have to work at it. And it was introduced to me through an author named Thomas Kelly. I think I have his book back here too. Yeah. Quaker writer who wrote like a long time ago. It's called A Testament of Devotion. Mm. And he talks about a thing called inward prayer. And actually I have it up on my screen, but I could also just read from the book. How about that? Awesome. And in it, there is a way of life, he says. There is a way of ordering our mental life on more than one level at once. So this is great for you multitaskers, right? There is a way of doing more than one thing at the same time. Mm-hmm. On one level, at the exterior, we might be thinking, discussing, calculating, seeing, meeting all the demands of external affairs. So you're planning a message, you're leading your team, you're going through a budget revision, you're cleaning your house, whatever is the thing you're doing. But deep within, simultaneously behind the scenes at a profounder level, we may also be in prayer and adoration, song and worship, and a gentle receptiveness, and this is key, to divine breathings. So while I'm scrubbing my toilet, while I'm responding to an email that has got me on an amygdala hijack because I'm so upset about it, while I'm in the middle of those things, I can train my heart, my soul, my attentiveness to God to function on both levels at once and be in gratitude, prayer, worship, a gentle receptiveness to whatever God might be breathing into that moment. Like, think, how many times does God want to breathe wisdom as I'm about to hit send on an email?
And for me, it's usually he has to be not so gentle.
Right. But that's what we cultivate, that sensitivity to that awareness of his constant presence with us. And then this is
have to hit us over the head because we're in tune. We are already there.
It's an ongoing conversation, right? So the secular world of today, and I would argue sometimes the ministry world of today, values and cultivates only that first level. Like, where are things actually happening, right? What's the budget? What's the talk you're writing? What's this? What's that? Assured that that's where the real business of mankind is done, and scorns or smiles in tolerant amusement at the cultivation of this second level. Maybe it's a luxury enterprise for people with nothing better to do, or it's a certain vestige of superstition, he says, or an occupation for special temperaments, right? Like, if you're a certain kind of person, then maybe this is available. That's not true. This is available to all of us as humans. He says, in a deeply spiritual culture, people know that the deep level of prayer and of divine attendance or divine paying attention is the most important thing in the world. It is at this deep level that the real business of life is determined. And I love the imagination that sets up for me, that there's this seen world and then there's this unseen world. And in the seen world, we can be doing all the things that are demanded of us. This is back to, how do I keep breathing in the middle of my exertion, right?
Right.
I can do all those things, but I can also cultivate this practice, this ability to be turning my attention back to this ongoing conversation with God. And when and as we do, might it not be true? Don't we love the imagination that as we're open to those divine breathings, those whispers from heaven, that we are able, in a supernatural way, like, we can't connect the dots quite directly, but we can trust that in the unseen world, the things that we actually care about in the seen world are going to get handled in ways above and beyond what we would have asked or imagined, by God's goodness, by his grace, and to his glory and our good. And we then, that's a yoke that is easy and a burden that is light. It's like, I can go through my day doing the work and attentive to this ongoing conversation, saying, God, how do you want this email to end?
Mm.
God, what do you want the budget to be for next year? What do you want our top priority to be as I'm leading this team? What do you, and we may send something. I've heard this from a lot of people who start incorporating this practice. Guess what? Most times when people start doing this practice, guess what they hear most often?
I don't know.
What do you want? What do you want the top priority to be?
Wow.
I love you no matter what. What is your joy?
Wow.
And I'm like, well, I know I'm used to just being told do what I'm supposed to be told to do. And I just sense God is saying, yeah, I know that about you. What is your desire? What is your imagination? What do you see? This is not entitlement. This isn't like the, name it and claim it. This isn't all the weird things that have happened.
No.
But what if God has placed you, woman, exactly where he has you, because there's a certain imagination that you're going to have over your circumstances, that you then prayerfully invite the Spirit into that. And what if God actually cares about what creative idea springs to mind for you?
What if he actually created you to do this thing that we've been stomping down because of this funky, weird thing that we've set up?
I just need to be told what to do.
Right? Yeah, as what living and serving in the kingdom is really all about. Wow, that is beautiful. And it gives me, I've shared on several other episodes that I feel like God is working in my life this picture of being like tethered to him. And the more frequently, for me, a thing has been throughout my life, breath prayers, just as I'm going about my day.
Love them.
The whole, orange curriculum. I've been in kids ministry my entire life. And so the whole, as you go along the way, as you walk on the path, as you're in your home, and so that is a very deeply rooted rut, a beautiful rut for me.
Beautiful rut. Yes.
And so, but in the past couple of years, it's just become even more, I've become more aware of it. And I'm like, isn't it interesting that the more frequently we check in with Jesus throughout our day, which would tie into this gentle receptiveness, guess what your desires and your longings start being shaped by?
Yes.
Him in the first place.
100%.
He's
100%.
100% filling you up. So why wouldn't you want what he wants? But I don't know what he wants if I'm not tethered to him. So it's just such an exciting, not pain-free. And sometimes I think people go, are you seriously saying, like, if you can get into this space, nothing is going to disappoint you? That's not at all true. But I can say with 100% assurity, the disappointment hits differently. It just does.
Yeah. I'm not saying every circumstance turns out exactly as you would have hoped or wanted, but you're on a journey with one who loves you. And then you're saying,
it's okay.
Oh, gee, that's not fun. God, how would you like me to respond here? It just keeps the conversation going.
Yes. I love it. It's beautiful. Oh my goodness. There's no better way we could have wrapped this session up. Oh my goodness.
Love it.
So, and what I want our listeners to leave with is that word invitation. It literally, that is all Jesus is about. What is the thread through all of Scripture? It is an invitation to be with him. God
Always.
with us, he came down because we still weren't getting it. And he came down in the flesh to go, I'm inviting you into this. So listeners, please take this as the gift that we pray that it is for you, and that you will, these practices of these handles that you gave us at the end here, this rubric is just going to flesh it all out. I can't wait to hear from our listeners different ways that has been experienced in their life. It's so good.
Great.
Thank you so much, Mindy. Is there anything else you want to say as we wrap up today?
Oh, gosh, 10 things flood my mind. I think just the main thing, since you've been keying in on it over our conversation, is, ladies, reject any view of God that has him as an angry, judgy, demanding entity, impersonal force, and move toward Jesus, toward the Spirit, toward God the Father as a good shepherd, as one who has laid his life down for his sheep, and who has said his sheep will hear his voice. Like it's what if it's so much more than we're currently experiencing? And what if getting to that point where we're experiencing more of that love and goodness and mercy and loving kindness and all the things that God is, all the fruit of the Spirit is who he is. That's who God is toward you. All of 1 Corinthians 13, love is this and that and that. That's who God is toward you. And I just have this image of, somebody's just so far underwater and struggling, trying to do freestyle, submerged. And like, just, could you let yourself float to the top for maybe the next 5 minutes? Just float to the top, turn over, and breathe.
Thank you so much, Mindy. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's delightful to be with you.
Thanks for listening to the Plant Strong podcast. Plant Strong is part of the Stadia podcast network. To find more great podcasts and to see how Stadia can help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation, be sure to check out stadia.org/podcasts.